I'd like to talk about some technical work that might help address some of the problems we face. Um, I suppose I can take just a moment to characterize the problems, though. Um, One issue is that many of the countermeasures try to improve the recent ages of technology in the digital sphere have backfired. Let me give you two examples. Some of you might be aware that today the United Nations pulled back from an attempt to protect children online from simulated romantic relationships. And the reason why was privacy regulation, because in order to do that, somebody would have to look at what's going on, which would violate privacy. So therefore, we sacrifice children. And now this is very silly. As it happens, I played a role in initiating the privacy regulations because 25 or 30 years ago, a Italian prosecutor named Alessandra Buttarelli and I co-founded an advisory board for data protection for the EU that eventually was one of the feeders for the GDPR. And the problem is that in the course of it turning into actual regulation, the GDPR became something that was complicated enough to follow that it favored large companies over little ones. And it ultimately probably favored the big West Coast American companies over European ones. And now here we also see it making it difficult to protect children. So the whole thing, in a way, backfired, even though it had very good intentions. Um, a second one, which comes from a completely different sphere, was a quarter century ago, the pirate parties and the movement from a sort of a populist leftist perspective and an anti-capitalist perspective to make information free and to denounce musicians who wanted to be paid or writers who wanted to be paid and so on. And the idea was that this would democratize knowledge. Whenever somebody involved in technology uses the word democratize, you should run because it's not democracy. And the reason why is the way that digital hubs tend to become ultra powerful monopolies simply because of the mathematics of digital connections in a very low friction system. Whatever the most important node is tends to become even more important. And then you end up with TikTok and Meta and Google and so on. And so what happened is demonetizing the musicians might have done some good. And I think a lot of people do enjoy the world that came about. But if you try to calculate how many musicians lost their livelihoods, it's really kind of astonishing. The best I can figure is that around the turn of the century in the United States, the data was about 500,000 musicians actually earning a full-time, long-term, lifetime salary from music. And now it's very hard to come by numbers, but I think we've seen a decrease of maybe 3 orders of magnitude, at least between 2 and 3 orders of magnitude in that sector. And you can say, well, that's okay, it's only one sector. But on the other hand, writers, musicians, artists, thinkers, they're they're the human soul, like I think it was a real loss. And I think it's also part of why a lot of culture's gone crazy, which is that the new way of making a living involves becoming an antagonist in the terms of the algorithms to get attention, which is in turn to make the platforms more powerful and influential in an attention economy. And so we've not only demonetized the people, we've kind of corrupted and lessened them. Okay, so now we come to the era of AI. Our current problem is that if you put forward some of the issues, like what will happen with human dignity, what will happen with human roles, who will protect children and grieving people and confused people from AI fakeries that are actually in the service of some weird malicious, server somewhere. Um, Almost entirely within the small influential AI community that I talked about before, those problems will be dismissed as unimportant because the really important thing is that AI will become super intelligent and take over. And then there's the debate between those who think that would be a good thing and those who think it would be a bad thing. And then the compromise is to say, well, we'll work on alignment, which means trying to convince this AI alien entity of the future to like people. But the problem is that that's not a well-defined, like nobody knows what they're talking about. I say this with technical authority. It's just like this weird fantasy, nothing. And where I think it comes from is all of my colleagues having grown up on the stories of science fiction. So all of us can only communicate within the stories we grew up in. And if you grew up with the Bible, then you can communicate about, I don't know, the golden calf or many of the stories. If you grew up on the Terminator and Matrix movies, then the story you have is AI taking over and maybe destroying humanity. Okay, so now what I want to do is proceed to the technical side of trying to improve things. I want to emphasize this is all work in progress and not proven. And I also want to emphasize that there's not a consensus that what I'm doing is the right approach, nor could there be. Um, Also, this stuff is kind of hard to do. It's difficult research, and so I can't promise a particular result at a particular time. But anyway, I thought I would let you know a little bit about what a technical approach to addressing these problems might look like. Some of the people in the room from the academic world might find it interesting. I hope you will. Um, so let us start with the concept of data dignity. So data dignity is a concept, the name actually comes from Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, but I'd first articulated it a decade and a half ago in a book called Who Owns the Future? And the idea of it is that instead of treating data as a freestanding thing, you treat it only as something that comes from real people. And you try to remember the context in terms of its origin point with real people, because all data comes from something somebody did at some point. Even synthetic data in AI is indirectly from people if you can trace it back. So the original version of data dignity was paying musicians and writers for their stuff instead of treating it all as an influence economy in which their work is only used for advertising purposes for something else. So that was that had maybe a slight impact on the world, but the data dignity concept applies even more to the era of AI. So with a large model, a large AI model, you can think of it in two ways. You can think of it as some new alien entity that has thoughts and does things you can think of it as a noun or as a creature of some kind, or you can think of it as a new form of collaboration. You can think of it as a collection of efforts from people that have been bundled in a new way, maybe a little like the Wikipedia, but with a bunch of statistics thrown in. From a technical point of view, neither is more accurate. This isn't a scientific question. This is a question of philosophical interpretation. Both are completely accurate. I prefer thinking of AI as a bundle of people for many reasons. I think it's more moral and more ethical, but it's also more actionable because the more you notice human agency, the more potential there is to act. And the more you deny human agency, the less potential there is to do anything, kind of obviously. So I prefer to think of them as bundles of things people have done. But then some of my colleagues will immediately say, but that's useless because we don't know who did what. The whole point of a large AI model is we mush everything and we lose all those origins. And then my question is, well, why? Do we really need to? Can we keep track of them? So the answer is, of course, we made a decision to lose people. We didn't have to. It was a cultural, and I would like to call it a religious decision. I think there's a digital religion in which computers are as real as people or more real. And so we made a decision to forget the people because that's the particular magic trick we want to play. We want to pass the Turing test. We've made a decision that fooling people is a legitimate scientific result. That's what the Turing test teaches us. And I think that's the most stupid thing in the history of science. Anyway, because people are easy to fool. We want to be loved. We want to have God care about us. And so if you have a program say that, why wouldn't people believe it? You know, it's easy. It's beneath us. It's too easy. Oh my God. Anyway, let's leave that aside. Now, how do you trace where it came from? Well, that's a very interesting question. And ideally, when you train the model, you would keep track of just where the data is, and you'd keep some kind of a little system, and so that as the model's operating, you can say, hey, you know this turn of phrase in that term paper I just created so you didn't have to write? Well, that actually came from this writer in 1943. Maybe send that person a thank you or their descendants or something. Like you could do that. You could keep track. But since we've trained the models in a way that lost the data, can we go back? Yeah, we can. Actually, we can do that. And in fact, at this point, there's an international, small but real community of researchers who are studying this attribution. It has different names in different places. Sometimes it's called the attribution problem, and there's other terms for it. But there's a very nice group at MIT, there's a group at Oxford, there are a few groups at German universities, there's a group at Stanford even. And of course, we have our little group at Microsoft. And so we're all working on it. And there have been increasingly better results. Okay, so then the next question is, are you just doing this as a do-gooder who wants to pay all those people? Now, I should mention, I'm in a really funny situation where I'm suing myself. And the way this works is I'm on the board of the Authors Guild in the United States, which is suing OpenAI and Microsoft for the use of books in training AI. So I asked the Microsoft lawyers and also the Authors Guild lawyers, is it okay if I'm suing myself? They're, oh, we sue ourselves all the time. And so I think of it as capitalist yoga. It's sort of like I'm doing some weird thing. I don't know exactly how this will play out. My approach to it, as I think in a lot of the present era, many of us who try to be engaged are put in sort of odd positions, and I feel that constantly. And my goal is just to be as honest and honestly just to use humor and be funny with everybody and very open to the degree I can to try to make it through these weird times. So I don't know how that'll all play out, but at any rate, my opinion is that the ultimate interest of society and the tech companies and the writers are all aligned simply because we've only got one planet. And to like, we obviously have more in common than in opposition to one another, obviously. So I don't think in any deep sense, there's really a problem. I think we just need to find a better win-win solution for everybody. Okay, now, how do you do attribution? It's a little complicated if the information was deliberately lost when you mushed up all the data, which is the attention mechanism just grabs a big chunk of data and throws away all the context. You can do it statistically. It actually is doable. We know we can do it. Now, then the next question though is, is there any other benefit, or is it only a do-gooder thing? Like, can you go to somebody with a big AI company and say, hey, if you do this, there's a reason beyond paying all those people who you'd rather ignore? Okay, I'm sorry, that sounded a little dark and cynical, but I'm being funny. The people are not, the tech people are not so malicious actually, but anyway. The answer is an interesting one, and that is one of the issues we have with AI. I don't really believe that AI will decide to become super intelligent and try to kill all of humanity. I do believe we could automate weapon systems or food systems and all that, and then that automation could fail and kill all of humanity. So I think that killing all of humanity using technology is a very real scenario. The particular interpretation that it's the Terminator or the Matrix movie, I think, is an unnecessary and disempowering and technically arbitrary interpretation of such a scenario. But I want to give you a little story to ponder. Let us suppose there's some sort of criminal or terrorist, somebody who's a person both Jeffrey and I could agree is not a good person, and they're holed up in a kitchen, and the police are outside, and this criminal holds up a phone and says, okay, here's the stuff in the kitchen. Oh, AI model, show me how to make a bomb with available things very quickly. Okay, now, if you do that right now, with most of the AI models, there'll be what we call a guardrail, which will trap that and prevent it from happening. I say most, because I don't know about X, I wonder about them, but at any rate, no, they probably do. But most of the mainstream models will do what they can to prevent that. But the problem is that these guardrails are unreliable. There are widely disseminated tricks, sometimes called prompt injections, that you can use to overtake them. And the fact that you can still overcome the guardrails is demonstrated over and over again. I think in particular, we should acknowledge researchers from Anthropic for demonstrating this in a rigorous way, but there's a lot of evidence, and anyone in this room can learn to overcome the guardrails if you really want to. And in a way, it's kind of a miracle, or I guess I can say in the Vatican, a blessing that nothing worse has happened that we know of on the basis of that. And it is often said criminals tend to be stupid. I hope that is true. But honestly, it's not that hard. Okay, so can you use data dignity to solve this problem? I assert we will. I think this is the way to solve the problem. The issue is that the more that you try to use AI, you use more AI to solve the problems of the original AI, you're just walking in circles. So you say, well, we'll train the AI to recognize criminal intent. Good luck with that. I mean, if AI is about fooling people, criminality becomes about fooling AI. Who do you think is going to win that race? The criminal will, because the AI was trained on the criminal and the criminal evolved. People are not fixed. People also learn. People also change, even faster than programs sometimes. Okay, imagine, if you will, that in a future AI, as it's operating, this large model is generating results, and in parallel, there's a process that's doing data dignity attribution. It's doing it in a general way to clusters of relevant documents, and it's calculating counterfactual relevance. And what that means is, had these documents not been present, how different would the result be? It's not judging whether the documents were correct or good or bad or anything about them. It's just doing counterfactual relevance. All right, so now let's say you have the top 12 or 20 clusters of documents that had they been absent, the result would have been different. The chances are very strong there'll be one about bombs in there. If there was some kind of a guardrail bypassed with a prompt injection, this will still catch it. Now, I want to make another metaphor to this. In security and authentication, where you are trying to attempt to discern if the person who's using a credit card or whatever it is actually the person involved, it used to be that you just kept on folding more and more into the single authentication channel. So you'd say, well, here's a CAPTCHA, here's a puzzle. But then what happened is somebody said, well, what if we do what's called multi-factor, where it also checks on your phone and sends you a code? I personally find that to be extremely annoying. But the thing is, as annoying as it is to me, it's even more so to the person committing fraud, because it makes it harder, not impossible, but harder to complete the whole cycle of fraudulent identity when there's multi-factor. In a sense, you can think of the data dignity approach as the multi-factor version for AI, because what it's doing is, by calculating these counterfactuals, it doesn't care about the logic of the model, or well, not exactly the logic. It doesn't care about the training of the model. It doesn't care about the function of the model. It doesn't care about a reasoning model. It doesn't care about the fine tuning of the model. All it's doing is tracing through counterfactual relevance completely impartially without any concern for what the model actually does. So you have a second channel that is independent of how the model was trained. That's going to be much harder to contravene. And we've already done some testing with that. That's kind of an interesting thing, right? Now, the next question is, how much does it cost to do it? And this is another interesting question, because if it costs 10 times as much to operate the model with this capability, it probably wouldn't be an ethical choice to do it, because we already have a carbon footprint disaster with the level of AI computation we're supporting. I mean, it's unfathomable and just crazy. And so hopefully nuclear fusion will start working on the ground soon or something, so that we can have some alternative to what we're doing. But at any rate, there's an interesting question in all. So here, I usually don't like making metaphors between biological and digital systems, but I do want to make one in this case. If you look at the evolution of biological brains, from the very earliest ones, they appear to have developed both excitatory and inhibitory systems that in a way fight against each other. And we do have this idea of adversarial systems in training AIs now, but we don't really have the notion of adversarial real-time running AI particularly. We have a little bit of it, but you can think of this approach I've been describing as a sort of a deeper kind of inhibitory or adversarial real-time AI. And so what we see in biological systems is apparently an increase in overall efficiency by having that instead of a decrease. Were that not so, then you'd only have the excitatory system and you'd have simpler brains, but instead you have this more complex thing that's quite universal. So we believe, there are other arguments I could give that are more detailed, but we believe that at the end of the day, this will actually be an efficiency instead of an inefficiency, although it'll initially certainly be an efficiency while we work on it. But if you look at the amount of overhead we put into big models on trying to improve results, like reducing hallucinations and all, by increasing the scale more and more and more, we really think we might be able to do better with this data dignity idea. Another extremely interesting correlate to this is if you can trace back the data to the origins instead of just mushing everything together, you can distinguish different types of origins in the training. And this is a bit of a subtle point. Let's consider the Wikipedia for a second. There's no such thing as a large language model that didn't include the Wikipedia in the training. But an interesting thing about the Wikipedia is that there's a secondary corpus of data, which is the data that was rejected, all of the edits that the community didn't like. And there's also discussions about why those things were rejected. Now, if you train on the whole thing at once, you increase hallucinations, and some models do that. But if you can trace, if you can do an attribution in the way that I've described for data dignity, you can distinguish the accepted data in the Wikipedia from the rejected data in the Wikipedia, which I've been calling an anti-model. And then you can create a inhibitory system based on the rejected data as well. So I had some students run a test on that over the summer, and we think we can reduce hallucinations like a lot, like really a lot. And I mean, I don't want to make specific claims, but we really had some very impressive benchmark improvements by incorporating that. And so if that holds, and that's an if, because this is science and it's not ideology. So it might turn out that what looks like a good result won't hold up at larger scales or something, who knows. But it appears that attribution and remembering the nature of where data came from can actually make a system much more robust and much more reliable. Trying the same, there's a lot of variations on this. I could go into many versions of it, but anyway, the point is that what I'm hoping is that there's going to be a sort of a synthesis that'll happen where the AI community will see that remembering the humans instead of hiding the humans actually improves the quality of the stuff we do. Okay, so now let me address a long-term question. Sometimes when I say what I've just said in my own technical community, I'll get back a lot of complaints, and I think I can represent them approximately as the following. Well, you're saying that you want to pay people for the data. You're saying that you want to know who the people were. If we know whose data contributed, aren't we just going to create a lot of tension? In the same way, money anonymizes who did what in the past. Don't you want that with data and AI? Are you sure you want to lose that anonymity? And then another thing they'll say is, you want to pay people, but what people do won't be worth anything. Like only the AI output will be worth something, and people will just be paid pennies. Why would you do that? That would be even worse than nothing. That would be even more insulting to their dignity. And here, there's a kind of a question. It's a funny thing because in the AI community, I'm sometimes described as a skeptic, and what skeptic means in that case is I'm saying, oh, well, you don't believe the AI will come alive and become godlike, so you're a skeptic. And in my community, there's a lot of people believe that will happen in 2027. It's kind of like the people who think that the apocalypse is about to happen or whatever. And what I say is, no, you're the one who's the pessimist. You're the skeptic, because what I believe is that if we incentivize people to do new and creative things because they're making new kinds of data that wasn't expected, because we want AIs to be able to, I don't know, synthesize medical robots to give us wings so we can fly about in space between the planets, or whatever it might be, entirely new things, that people will rise to the occasion. And in fact, there might be an ever expanding world of entirely new spheres of creativity that could go on forever. And it could be this endless blossom of creativity that doesn't stop, instead of rehashing the data that the AI was already trained on. So I'm the optimist, because I believe that there's a potential of infinite creativity in the future, rather than just that. I don't believe that you and me, these techies in the room, are the smartest people of all time, and that after this, humanity is done. So is my time over? All right, good. That's a good stopping point. Thank you so much.